The conference room went silent when General Morrison said my name. My boss Derek's face drained of color as he watched the two-star general stand at attention, addressing the woman he'd spent 3 months treating like incompetent office furniture. "Colonel Reeves," the general said, his voice carrying military precision. "We need to discuss the threat assessment." Derek's mouth opened, closed. His eyes darted between me and the general like he was watching a tennis match that would decide his career. Let me back up. The email arrived on a Monday morning. "Sandra, FYI, Pentagon security audit next week. They'll want to review our systems. Make sure everything's documented." It was from my actual boss, the chief information officer, 2 levels above Derek. Derek had been named project supervisor 3 months ago, which mostly meant he supervised me doing the work while he took credit in meetings. I was 43, quiet, the kind of middle-aged woman people looked past in grocery stores. My daily uniform was cardigans and slacks from Target, reading glasses on a chain, sensible shoes. I'd perfected the art of being underestimated. It was safer that way. Derek had called me into his office that afternoon, spinning in his expensive chair like a kid playing executive. He was 31, Stanford MBA, 6 months into his first real management role. "This audit," he'd said, not looking up from his phone. "I need you to handle the technical stuff. Password logs, firewall documentation, that IT hobby of yours." "It's not a hobby," I'd said mildly. "It's my job." "Right, sure." He'd waved a hand. "Just make me look good. This is my chance to impress the brass. Maybe finally get some respect around here for dealing with outdated systems." And he gestured vaguely at me. "Limited resources." I'd been working cybersecurity for the Department of Defense for 22 years. 17 of those in uniform. But Derek had my resume, the sanitized version, and saw only IT Specialist 3 and a state college degree from 1999. The week before the audit, he'd started micromanaging, questioning my protocols, asking why I ran certain scans, why I flagged certain anomalies, why I wasted time on what he called paranoid security theater. "Nobody's hacking us, Sandra," he'd said, exasperated, when I flagged suspicious login attempts from an IP address in Eastern Europe. "We're a logistics office. We track spare parts. You think Russian hackers care about helicopter bolts? These systems connect to wider DoD networks," I'd explained. "We're not the target. We're the door." He'd rolled his eyes. "Just finish the documentation. And try to sound professional when the Pentagon people get here. Let me do the talking." The auditors arrived on Thursday. I'd expected a team of civilian contractors with clipboards. Instead, 2 Air Force officers in dress blues walked through the door, followed by a Navy captain. And then, my breath had caught, General Arthur Morrison, Deputy Commander of U.S. Cyber Command. I'd worked with Morrison in 2012. Different context, different war, different version of me. Derek had stumbled through introductions, puffed up with self-importance. "I'm Derek Chun, project supervisor for this security integration. I've been overseeing our cyber infrastructure modernization. This is Sandra. She helps with the technical details." "Helps," Morrison had repeated, his eyes finding mine. I'd kept my expression neutral, but something flickered in his gaze. Recognition, maybe, or just assessment. The audit started normally. Derek walked them through PowerPoint slides he'd had me create, explaining his approach to network security. The Air Force officers took notes. Morrison listened, his face unreadable. Then the Navy captain opened her laptop. "We've been monitoring your systems remotely for the past 48 hours with DoD authorization. We identified 17 vulnerabilities in your external interfaces. 14 were patched before we could exploit them. Whoever's running your security is good. Very good." Derek had beamed. "Well, I've implemented some cutting-edge protocols. Show me your intrusion detection logs." Morrison had interrupted. Derek had blinked. "I'm sorry, your IDS logs. Real-time threat monitoring. I want to see what you're tracking." "Sandra handles that level of detail," Derek had said, his smile tightening. "Sandra, pull up those logs." I'd opened my workstation. 3 monitors lit up with cascading data, network traffic analysis, behavioral anomaly detection, threat correlation matrices. It wasn't standard DoD issue. I'd built half of it myself, custom scripts and monitoring tools refined over 2 decades. One of the Air Force officers had leaned forward. "Is that a modified Einstein system? Those detection algorithms?" "Custom," I'd said quietly. The standard package missed too many sophisticated probes. You built this. The officer's voice carried surprise. Adapted it. The core architecture is classified NSA methodology. I modified the heuristics for our specific threat profile. Derek had laughed nervously. Sandra's very enthusiastic about her IT hobby. Sometimes she goes overboard. This is exceptional work, Morrison had said, cutting him off. His eyes were locked on my screens. Captain Rivera, look at this threat correlation. She's not just detecting intrusions. She's predicting attack vectors. The Navy captain had come around the desk. Her expression shifted from professional to impressed. You're running behavioral analysis on network administrators. Insider threat detection. Our biggest vulnerability isn't external, I'd said. It's credential compromise and social engineering. Show me your active threat board, Morrison had ordered. I'd pulled up my tracking system. 16 ongoing investigations. Phishing attempts targeting 3 employees. 1 contractor whose access patterns had changed suspiciously. 2 external probes that looked coordinated. Derek had gone pale. Wait, you're investigating our people? I never authorized. You wouldn't understand what to authorize, Morrison had said, and his voice carried the weight of command now. This is professional-grade counterintelligence work. That's when he turned to me, really looked at me, and said, Colonel Reeves, we need to discuss the threat assessment. The air left Derek's lungs audibly. The 2 Air Force officers straightened slightly, their body language shifting from curious to respectful. Captain Rivera's eyes widened. General Morrison, I said carefully, I'm retired. Once a colonel, always a colonel, ma'am. He turned to Derek. Mr. Chun, I need the room. But this is my now. Derek left, his face cycling through confusion, anger, and dawning horror. The door clicked shut behind him. Morrison pulled out a chair and sat, gesturing for me to do the same. The formality dropped slightly, though his bearing remained military precise. Sandra Reeves. Call sign Cipher. U.S. Army Cyber Command, 780th Military Intelligence Brigade. You ran network defense operations during the surge in Iraq. You were the senior cyber warfare officer for Joint Special Operations Command. You helped build half the doctrine we still use. Captain Rivera's mouth actually fell open. The cipher? You wrote the threat attribution methodology we learned at cyber school. Contributing author, I said. It was a team effort. You retired 4 years ago, Morrison continued. Medical separation after a stroke brought on by stress and exhaustion from working 18-hour days for 2 years straight, identifying and stopping attacks against forward operating bases. He paused. You saved lives, Colonel. A lot of them. One of the Air Force officers, a major, spoke up. Ma'am, if you don't mind my asking, why are you working here? No disrespect to logistics operations, but I needed quiet, I said simply. After the stroke, I couldn't handle the operations tempo anymore. The pressure, making split-second decisions where people died if I was wrong. I gestured at my monitors. This lets me do the work without the weight. And your supervisor has no idea? Morrison said. It wasn't a question. My resume lists my military service. It doesn't list the classified parts. I'm credentialed as an IT specialist because that's what my public record shows. Derek sees a middle-aged woman with a state college degree. He's not looking deeper. He called your work a hobby, Captain Rivera said, something like anger in her voice. People see what they expect to see. Morrison leaned forward. Sandra, we have a problem. A serious one. 3 months ago, we started seeing coordinated probes against secondary DoD installations. Not primary targets, support facilities, logistics operations, places with lower security budgets. Someone's mapping our network topology, looking for soft entry points. I pulled up one of my tracking files. Like this. The screen showed a pattern analysis I'd been building, seemingly random login attempts across different systems, different times, but all originating from a cluster of proxy servers. Morrison's jaw tightened. You've been tracking this? For 6 weeks. I flagged it through normal channels. No response. I assumed it was being handled at higher classification levels. Your flag never made it past your supervisor, the major said quietly. We checked the communication logs. Mr. Chin marked it as resolved locally and archived it. The room temperature seemed to drop. He didn't understand what he was looking at, I said. He thought I was being paranoid. These probes correlate with 17 other installations, Morrison said. We've been trying to identify the pattern for 2 months. You found it in 6 weeks, working alone, with a fraction of the resources. He pulled out a tablet, swiped through screens. How deep does this go? I walked him through it. The attack pattern suggested a nation-state actor, probably affiliated with Eastern European or Chinese intelligence services. They were probing, testing, learning our response times and protocols, building a map for a larger operation. This is preparation, I said. They're not stealing data yet. They're positioning. For what? Something big. When they're ready, they'll have access points across the entire DoD support infrastructure. They could disrupt logistics, corrupt data, create chaos during a crisis. I highlighted a cluster of activity. And this facility is one of their primary test beds. We're isolated enough to experiment on, but connected enough to provide useful intelligence. Captain Rivera was typing furiously. We need to bring this to Cybercom leadership immediately. Agreed, Morrison said. Colonel Reeves, I need you to brief the Joint Chiefs on this threat pattern. Tomorrow, at the Pentagon. I hesitated. Sir, I'm not. I can't handle that environment anymore. The pressure. I'm not asking you to come back to active operations. I'm asking you to share what you know. One briefing. Then you can come back here to your quiet office. He met my eyes. But we need your expertise. You're seeing things my entire staff missed. The door opened. Derek stood there, his face flushed. I'm sorry, but I need to know what's going on. This is highly irregular. And as project supervisor, Mr. Chun, Morrison stood, and his voice carried parade ground authority. You have been willfully negligent in your duties. You ignored a credible threat assessment from a qualified professional. You buried intelligence that posed a direct risk to national security. And you did it because you were too arrogant to recognize expertise that didn't come wrapped in credentials you valued. Derek stammered. I didn't. She never said she was. She shouldn't have to announce her qualifications to do her job properly. You should have trusted the work instead of dismissing the worker. Morrison turned to the major. Contact his supervisors. I want a formal review of how this threat intelligence was suppressed. Yes, sir. Derek looked at me, and I saw the moment it clicked. All those times I tried to explain risks, all those reports he'd dismissed, all those hobby projects that were actually professional-grade threat analysis. Sandra, I didn't know you were. A colonel? A cyber warfare specialist? Someone who knew what they were talking about. I kept my voice level. You didn't ask. You assumed. Morrison gestured to the Air Force officers. Get Colonel Reeves everything she needs for tomorrow's briefing. Full SIPR access, updated threat feeds, transportation to the Pentagon. He looked at me. I know this isn't what you wanted when you took this job, but your country needs you. One more time. The briefing room at the Pentagon was smaller than I remembered, but the pressure felt the same. 4-star generals, intelligence directors, the vice chairman of the Joint Chiefs. My hands wanted to shake. I kept them steady on the presentation remote. I walked them through the threat pattern, showed them the attack topology, explained how our adversaries were building a systematic map of our support infrastructure. 40 minutes of technical detail delivered in calm, precise language. When I finished, the room was silent for a long moment. Then the Army Chief of Staff leaned forward. Colonel, this is the clearest picture we've had of this threat. Why are we only seeing this now? Because I'm working in a logistics office in Fort Meade with minimal security clearance and a supervisor who thought cybersecurity was a hobby, sir. That got a reaction. Morrison stepped in, explaining how my intelligence had been buried, how Derek had dismissed warnings, how I'd been tracking this threat for weeks with no support. This represents a systemic problem, the vice chairman said. We have qualified people in positions where they can't be effective because we don't recognize their value. The briefing ended with assignments, task forces, monitoring protocols, defensive measures. I answered questions, provided my analysis files, and felt the familiar weight of responsibility settling back onto my shoulders. Morrison found me afterward in the hallway. You did well. I need to go home, sir. Take my medication. Sleep for 12 hours. Understood. But Sandra, we need you. Not full-time, not active duty, but consulting, remote analysis. Your own pace, your own hours. He paused. We're wasting you in that logistics office. That logistics office keeps me sane, I said. It keeps me alive. I can't go back to the operations tempo. I'm not asking you to. I'm asking you to do what you're already doing, finding threats, analyzing patterns, but with proper support and resources. Stay where you are. Work your quiet job. But when we need your expertise, we call you in. Consultant rates, flexible schedule, proper clearances restored. I considered it. The old hunger was there. The need to solve puzzles, to protect people, to matter. But so was the caution, the memory of pushing myself until my body broke. Part-time, I said. Remote when possible. No 18-hour days. Agreed. Derek was waiting when I got back to the office the next day. He looked like he hadn't slept. Sandra, I owe you an apology. I didn't realize. You didn't ask. I interrupted. For 3 months, you treated me like I was incompetent. You dismissed my work, ignored my warnings, and called my expertise a hobby. I know. I was wrong. I was so wrong. He looked genuinely distressed. I'd been asked to provide a statement to the Inspector General's office. They're investigating how I handled security protocols. Good. I could lose my job. You should lose your job, Derek. You put people at risk because you couldn't see past your own assumptions. I sat down at my desk. You had someone with 2 decades of specialized experience, and you thought you knew better because you had an MBA and she had a cardigan. He flinched. Is there anything I can do? Learn from it. When someone tells you there's a problem, especially someone who's been doing the work longer than you've been alive, listen. Evaluate the information, not the package it comes in. He nodded slowly and left. My phone rang an hour later. General Morrison. Colonel, we've disrupted the probe network. Coordinated response across all affected installations. The threat actors are pulling back. They'll try again. I know. That's why we need you watching. He paused. How are you feeling? Tired. But okay. Good. Take care of yourself, Sandra. We need you around for the long haul. After we hung up, I pulled up my monitoring systems. The familiar cascade of data, the patterns and anomalies, the endless chess game against invisible opponents. But it felt different now. Not a hobby. Not something to be hidden or dismissed. Work that mattered. My email pinged. The CIO, my actual boss, Sandra, just got off the phone with Cyber Command. They're singing your praises. I should have checked in more, made sure you had what you needed. Let's talk about getting you properly positioned and resourced. Also, nice work keeping us safe. I smiled and started typing my response. That evening, I met my brother Tom for dinner. He was Navy, a career supply officer, and one of the few people who knew about my military background. How's the quiet life? He asked. Quieter than the Pentagon, busier than Derek expected. I told him the story. He laughed so hard he nearly choked on his water. I wish I could have seen his face. It was satisfying, I admitted. But also sad. He's not a bad person. Just young and overconfident. The military cures that pretty quickly, if you let it. We talked about family, our parents, his upcoming promotion. Normal things. Safe things. The kind of conversation I'd learned to value after years of abnormal and unsafe. Walking to my car later, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: balance. The work I loved, at a pace I could sustain. Recognition without the crushing weight. Purpose without the breaking point. My phone buzzed. A text from Morrison. Threat assessment request for next week. Your expertise needed. Remote work okay. Take your time. I got in my car, drove home to my quiet apartment, and sat down at my personal workstation. The analysis could wait until tomorrow. Tonight, I'd earned rest. But tomorrow, I'd be Cypher again. Hunting threats. Protecting people. Doing the work that mattered. Just at my own pace. On my own terms. Finally. End.